All right, hello and welcome. So most of us think we know A Christmas Carol. You know, it's that classic, heartwarming story of redemption we see every holiday season. But what if there's more to it? A much deeper academic reading suggests it's actually a profound prophetic text, almost like a piece of scripture for our modern age. So in this explainer, we're going to dive deep into this critical take on a story we only think we know.
And this is the idea that's going to frame our entire conversation. It's a really provocative thesis from the scholar Don Weiss. He argues that the story isn't just a tale, it's a new gospel, a sacred text that landed on the fertile ground of its time and really tapped into the soul of the nation. It's a huge claim, right? And it's one we're now going to systematically unpack.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at the evidence for calling this a new gospel. Then we're going to step back and look at the historical shadow that made its message so powerful. After that, we'll break down the actual mechanics of Scrooge's conversion, introduce a core concept called the love-joy nexus, and then finally we'll grapple with the really tough paradox the story leaves us with. Okay, so a new gospel, is that taking it too far? Well, let's start with its impact. From the second it was published, A Christmas Carol was an absolute phenomenon. It wasn't just a bestseller, it was a massive cultural event that just resonated so deeply with the hopes and, frankly, the fears of Victorian England.
And the speed of its success was just wild. It was published on December 19th, 1843. In just 6 days, by Christmas Day, the first 2 printings had completely sold out. That immediate, overwhelming response told everyone that Dickens had hit on something incredibly powerful.
So why? Why did it resonate so much? To get that, you have to understand Dickens's worldview. The argument here is that Dickens's moral framework was a lot like the prophets in the Hebrew Bible. His main concern wasn't about getting a reward in heaven or the afterlife. No, it was all about the ethical transformation of this world, the here and now. He was absolutely passionate about real, tangible social reform in the world we actually live in.
And that brings us to the historical context. You know, a message like this needs the right conditions, that fertile ground to really take root. And early Victorian England was exactly that. It was a society going through this massive, often brutal transformation, and that created a kind of moral vacuum and a desperate need for a new story to make sense of it all.
This timeline really puts it into perspective for us. The Industrial Revolution had been churning for decades. By 1843, Dickens was already a huge literary star in this brand new Victorian age, which put him in the perfect position to diagnose the sickness of his society. He was seeing the full, ugly consequences of unchecked industrial capitalism firsthand.
And those consequences were, in a word, dreadful. The cities were exploding into these overcrowded, filthy places. Rivers were choked with waste. And the thing that really got to Dickens was how the system exploited the most vulnerable people, especially children. There was this feeling everywhere that in the mad rush for progress, the nation was losing its very soul.
So this is where Ebenezer Scrooge comes in. He is the ultimate symbol of that corrupted soul. His story isn't just about one guy. It's Dickens's diagnosis for the whole of society's sickness. And it's his prescription for the cure, a radical, prophetic conversion.
Dickens's diagnosis of what's wrong with Scrooge is so brilliantly simple. His greed, his isolation, they aren't just bad habits that hurt other people. They are the direct cause of his own deep unhappiness. It's like a perfect form of karma. The miser is, by definition, miserable.
And what's so interesting is that the story itself is very aware of this process. Dickens doesn't just show us a transformation, he gives us the vocabulary for it. The word he uses in the text is reclamation. When Marley's ghost shows up, the central question he's there to ask is whether his old partner can, in fact, be reclaimed.
And this is where the academic reading really gets deep. Scrooge's reclamation is an almost perfect match for the ancient Hebrew concept of teshuvah. It literally means to turn or to return. And this isn't just about feeling bad for what you've done. It's a radical reorientation of your entire self, a conscious decision to turn back and start living the right way.
So this process, this teshuvah or reclamation, it unfolds in some very clear stages. First, you need a major shock to the system. In this case, the terrifying arrival of the ghosts. This forces a radical change of self, where Scrooge has to just shed that old protective, miserly ego. And then the final, absolutely crucial step is rejoining the human community, moving from that cold, bitter isolation into the warmth of loving relationships.
So at the end of this whole process, what's the big discovery that Scrooge makes? Well,
Don Weiss gives us a fantastic framework for understanding the story's big reveal. He calls it the love-joy nexus.
You can think of the story as presenting two totally opposite ways to live. On one side, you've got the miser. That's a life that's miserable, isolated, and all about self-protection. On the other side is what Weiss calls love-joy, a state of being that's all about joy, community, giving, and of course, love. Scrooge's entire journey is just moving from that first column over to the second.
So this is the nexus itself. The core insight is that love and joy are completely inseparable. They aren't two different things. They're two sides of the same coin. According to this reading, real, true joy is only possible when you're immersed in genuine, loving connections with other people. You literally can't have one without the other.
And it's so important to get this. For Dickens, this joy isn't some abstract, spiritual idea up in the clouds. Oh no, it is earthy, it is tangible, it is communal. It's the joy of a big family feast, of a party, of dancing, of celebrating together as a community. It's the actual, physical, lived experience of human connection.
And all of this leads to a really powerful conclusion, something Weiss calls the love-joy no-brainer. Once you truly understand that a life of community and love leads directly to personal joy, while a life of selfish isolation leads only to misery, well, the choice should be obvious. It should be a total no-brainer.
And that brings us to our final section, and to the story's enduring, prophetic challenge. Because if the truth of this love-joy nexus is so simple and so obvious, then why? Why is it so hard to find in our world?
You know, the prophetic promise, whether it's from ancient figures like Isaiah or right through Dickens' story, is actually very clear and consistent. A life of mutual love and support is just better for everyone. Period. It's a happier, more joyful way to live. And once this is discovered, you'd think the idea would just catch on, that it would, in our terms, go viral.
And here it is. Here's the paradox we're left with. Scrooge's story proves the no-brainer. He makes the choice, and he finds this immediate, incredible joy. And yet, thousands of years after this prophetic message was first delivered, we still live in a world filled with so much hostility, violence, and isolation. The story gives us the answer, but it leaves us with this really unsettling question of why we still struggle so much to accept it.